Okay, so you mentioned that you're involved with with the world of visual art. Do you work in visual art yourself?
Yeah, I work in, and I would call what I do is maybe art services. I worked for a long time in the realm of the social services and transitioned a few years ago working in a neighborhood called the Downtown East Side in Vancouver. And I moved from working sort of frontline, sort of women's services to working in a gallery. The gallery was a resource for people impacted by mental illness and other kinds of disabilities. So it was sort of this hybrid. And from that work, I've transitioned to working now with the city of Surrey, and I work for the Surrey Art Gallery. And what I coordinate there is mainly school programs, discursive and public programs, and other kinds of engagement.
So your presentations are not just readings, they are indeed performances given with energy and intensity. How did that aspect of your artistic life develop?
I did not grow up in an urban center. I don't have an urban Black vernacular. I have a very rural, pastoral kind of upbringing. So it seemed, although I love spoken word and I love oral culture, I was trying to find a way to sort of balance those two kind of artistic forms, really. And I remember years ago, I was invited to open for an event for the wonderful writer Lawrence Hill. So got to open for him, which I was, of course, terrified. And it was one of the largest crowds I've ever read for, even to date. There's like 300-400 people there to hear, you know. And so I thought, this is a pretty serious moment. I'm going to memorize what I'm going to say, and I'm going to speak off the page. But it was a beginning for me to think through performance and memorizing and actually speaking actions. I'm working on a manuscript right now, and part of it, as I say, you know, I grew up in a rural environment. I grew up on a farm. That, you know, first 15 years of my life, you know, bused to a farm school. I was around farmers. That was my early life in southwestern Ontario, not far from where you all are. So I really kind of shut that part of my life down for a long time. It's quite, you know, when you first move to the city, come to Toronto, and it's like just trying to be urban or cool or whatever it was in my younger years. And now later, with some wisdom maybe and maturity anyways, I realized that was incredibly valuable experience, and that there's a lot of knowledge and peace and time that I was exposed to that is actually quite precious.
So that's informing your work your poetry coming forward?
Yeah, my forthcoming work is working through kind of an almanac sort of structure, which, if you're familiar with it, is kind of, some of it's silly and you know, delightful, but some of it's attempting to document and relate to cycles of the tides or the moon, and when to plant things and when's the best time and when it's going to be a drought. And so I'm trying to get to that. I'm trying to talk about what that's like within the context of Black diasporic experience, which is not something that is typically understood as well on the Canadian landscape, I think. And certainly in my experience, this always seems to be a bit of a surprise to people that there are Black people on farms, which of course, and we have a long rural and intellectual and art history that connects to that, through dating back all the way through to the transatlantic slave trade. And I'm trying to touch on some of that, but in the meantime, also just the joy of working through now the metaphors of plants and plant life and ecology and the biome, and just all the ways in which that allows us to maybe talk a little more softly and loosely about issues, while still nurturing, you know, what it is that we're focusing on and how we're talking about it.
Speaking of your Windsor connections in the past, how did Wayside Sang come about?
You know, it's not disconnected from what I was talking about in terms of trying to locate my Black experience in the context of my rural history. I was also trying to understand, you know, my patrilineage, or, you know, where did my Blackness, as it were, come from? You know, Wayside Sang, I set about to try to figure out a little bit about that family history, and then realized that I was as taken by the landscape and the possible histories of labor, and of course connecting to industry and to the car, and then following that metaphor started to just fascinate me as well. It just started to be a vehicle in and of itself.